say about 1890. And I would never actually let my fire go out if I was living back in 1890 in a cabin such as our White Path cabin that we have here, because then you have to do this every morning. And you spend a long time trying to get a fire going and big enough to where you would want it to do anything on. But if I were living in the 1890s, what I would do is, if it was winter, of course, I would have, yes, finally. So if I was living in the 1890s, I would never let my fire go out. And if it was winter, the fire would be going all the time. If it was in the summer, I would bank the fire at night. So I would just kind of cover the coals with some ash. And then in the morning, I would go and would basically kick off the ash and get the coals started again. The first thing that we are going to do is cream the eggs and butter. There we go. We also got some nice ash with our butter too, so it's going to have a very nice smoky flavor. That's one of my favorite things about cooking over a fire, is how smoky everything tastes. Everything has like an instant smoked seasoning to it. Oh, seriously? It's coming straight back at us. Yeah, it's just coming straight back at us. So I'm using a wooden spatula to do this. So basically it's like a spatula like we have today, but it is just wooden. So if I was not just able to go get a stick of butter at the store, I would have to make my own butter, and that is if I had my own cow. This is salted butter. I would actually have to add my own salt to the butter if I were making it myself. So I would have a butter churn. They can be small. I have a nice little small butter churn that's about yay big. We have one about yay big in the cabin, and then they can get really, really big if you're like industrially making butter back in the 1800s. But if I wanted to make my own butter, I would have to go and milk the cow. And then I would milk the cow into the bucket. And then the bucket would have milk and cream on it. So what I would do is skim that cream off the top and then put that into the butter churn. And I would use the butter plunger, which basically it has like a nice like X or cross shape on the bottom, and you have to go up and down and up and down and up and down, trying to create that friction that would eventually turn that liquid, that cream, into a solid, which would be butter. And it would be unsalted butter. We're so used to butter being salted that we actually would taste butter from a butter churn. Like, what is this? Like, it's almost like it's sweeter because it's not salted. But it gives us some very interesting like expressions that come with it, like, you know, skimmed off the top. Buttermilk is kind of like that leftover liquid that is from the butter, so like or from the cream when you're making butter. So that's where you get buttermilk from, and that's why buttermilk is like very heavy, and it's almost like drinking whipping cream. It's like basically because you're drinking the excess that came from making cream. Skimmed milk is the milk that you had skimmed the cream off of that's still in the pail. So that's kind of like where we get like our different ideas of different types of milk from. Now we just go to the grocery store and we pick it off a shelf, and we don't really think about what these names mean or how they get those names. But now you know the origins of buttermilk. That's basically that kind of creamy milk that is accessed from making butter that's in the churn. And skimmed milk, where you know, after you milk the cow into the pail, you skim off that cream. That's skimmed milk. The rest of that milk that's in that pail. So this is my little butter churn. It's a replica of one that was made in the 1890s. This one was made by a man named Rod from Shell Pottery in Marshall, Texas. And this company has been doing it since, well, the 1890s. This is a super cute little butter churn. It's usually, you're probably used to seeing them not being made out of stoneware, out of pottery, but rather out of wood, and that is probably like the more traditional way of making it. It would be really hard and heavy to make giant butter churns out of wood. I'm sorry, out of clay, therefore they would be made out of wood. They're easier to move around, slightly more portable. But if you're just having a little one like this, why not make it out of stoneware? It's cute. And also might be harder to get wood to just be so small and to go together such. I don't know. I'm not a wood carver, but that is my theory. Now let me introduce you to the pieces of the butter churn. We have our little top here that has a nice small hole for the stick. We then have the churn itself. We then have our cross member and our stick. Now it will not come out, and that's done for reasons because you don't, basically it's like a safeguard. You will not pull your churn out so that you can just keep going down and you don't have to be as careful or gentle. You can just really go to town on the churn. But it does come out. You just kind of have to turn it the right way to get it out. So here we can show you a little bit more close up. So of the cross, that is the butter churn. It's actually, I was looking up quilt patterns, and if you ever see a quilt pattern like this, it's sometimes referred to as like a butter churn pattern because it looks like, well, the butter churn, thing that turns or churns the butter. So you would have your cream that you would put into here, and then of course you want to put on the top because you don't want it to be splashing all about. You want to be able to save all of that cream to turn it into butter, and then you just do this for a really long time because you're going to turn that liquid into a solid. I'm sure they built up a lot of muscles. Now this one is so nice because I could almost just I like to also, when I'm doing it like this, I can turn it because it's so small. I feel like that adds friction, so it helps it go faster. But yeah, that's the idea, is like to churn it, to have that churn go down. The liquid will then be plunged down and then up through the sides and then back down. So it's constantly, it's turning, it's churning all of that cream into butter. So we have this naked wild honey from the southeast, so authentic to our region. And it says to use 1 cup, so I have a cup. I'm not sure if it actually measures 1 cup, but this is authentic recreation of measurements were not as standard as they are today in the 1800s. My favorite is looking through old recipes, and they'll say, a lump of butter the size of an egg, or when your stick your hand over the fire, and when it's you can only hold it there 5 seconds, well then it's hot enough. But if you can hold it there 10 seconds, well no, it's not hot enough. Like, you need to heat up your fire a little bit more. It's so interesting because we always have this idea of like, well, I set the oven to 350 degrees and then I bake for 20 minutes and then it'll come out perfect. And it's like, there's a lot more guesswork in cooking before the standardization of measurements and actual ovens that we have today. So I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to fill up this cup with honey, because that is 1 cup of honey. Now, I obviously got this from a store, but if I were living back in the 1800s, well, would I go get my honey? Well, I would have to keep my own bees, or I would have to go out into the wild and find a hive and then be able to get that honey out of the hive safely. So I would have to know how to charm bees. Or I would have to trade a neighbor who had such talents or a hive of their own. In the Foxfire books, they talk about keeping bees, but it's like they keep it in a stump, basically, that they call something specific, like a sweet gum. But honey has been around forever. And the recipe honey cakes have also been around for a very long time, with variations in different regions and different cultures. So I was really happy to find one that seems to have originated in Appalachia, or at least has been used in Appalachia for a very long time. But as I was looking around and doing research before I found that recipe, there are ancient Roman honey cakes, ancient Greek honey cakes, basically ancient honey cakes from anywhere and everywhere. Because this is a very simple recipe. It's eggs and flour and honey and butter, which sounds really good. But it's very simple. And honey has long been used as a sweetener even before sugar got super popular, because like this recipe has no sugar. It's just honey. The sweetness of this is going to be the honey. So let's go ahead and add the honey. Oh yeah. So we do not have self-rising flour, even though the recipe calls for self-rising flour. The recipe has been modernized, of course. We are making it, of course, the old-fashioned, authentic way. We are doing it over a fire even. So instead of having self-rising flour, we have put in baking powder and some salt to make it self-rising, as it would have been in the 1800s. So now we are going to gently, it says to gently fold in the flour to this mixture. Of course, you mix your liquids together and then you add the flour, because you don't want to mix the flour too much, because otherwise it might get like hard and tough. So let's go ahead and we'll just start gently folding it in. Now, if I wanted to get flour back in the 1800s, like this nice white wheat flour here, I'm going to have to go and I'm going to have to either grow my own wheat and then take it to a mill where it could be ground into this nice fine white powder, or I would have to go to a general store and attempt to buy or barter for it. All right, that looks like it's a pretty good consistency of dough to me. Let's go ahead and put it into all right, has all my little fingerprints in it, but this is why you have an apron. It's a giant rag that you wear around your waist. Multifunctional. A lot of times, sometimes I prefer to use a pot holder, but sometimes ladies would just use the end of their apron as a pot holder, like so. I just prefer using one of these. It makes me feel like I'm not going to catch fire as easily. So not much changes between the mid-1800s and late 1800s. Just a few things. Some things like fabric choices. So we always think of like the Little House on the Prairie and the prairie dresses and this calico. And that kind of comes more into play. So the fabric, it's much more floral. This is not quite a calico, I would say. But it has a very nice floral print to it, very vine-like. Fabric such as this or this type of pattern, it's interesting because it's in fashion in the 1700s, and then it kind of goes out of fashion. So you have the whole first industrial revolution where you start to have fabric manufactured, and then basically I was talking to a textile historian who taught me a lot about historic dress when I was first starting out, Miss Martha, and she was basically saying for about the early to mid 1800s, if it has a pattern, it has to line up horizontally, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, because they were printing it as it was being rolled onto it. So it had to line up in those ways for it to be considered a print that would have been usable in the early to mid 1800s. But then as you get into the late 1800s, the second industrial revolution, we started to see more interesting things happen with textiles, different textile patterns. Floral prints such as this one that has like a very vine, very squiggly pattern are good for work dresses because they hide stains, it hides tears. If I need to, mend or darn something, it can be done and it doesn't look as noticeable as if it were just a plain dress. So I'm trying to see if I have any good examples of that on here, but I think I've kept this dress pretty nice for the most part. So, this is a little bit more of a mid-1800s, if I had to say if it was closer to the late or closer to the mid, I would probably say it's closer to the mid, just because of the sleeve style. And because it has it's not super poofy sleeves, but there's just a tad of a poof, just a little, and all the way down. So more or less of a bishop sleeve. Than in the later 1800s, you see a little bit more poof up on the top and a little closer fit down at the bottom. Of course, work dresses, they're not super stylish. They're for working. So if you have an old work dress, you're going to wear it to bits, and then you're going to take those bits apart and see if you can make those bits work for something else. If it clothes for your kid, if you have big enough pieces, or maybe clothes for the kid's doll, or you'll make a rag rug out of it. You'll take it apart, use it for rags in your kitchen, make a rag rug. You're going to use everything. You're going to use everything to the last bit, to the last scrap, and then, well, you might throw it on the fire and use it for kindling. My apron, though, does have a lot more holes in it. So this is a nice checked apron. It has 3 parts. So there's the apron front and then the 2 sides. It's just a tie-around apron. It just ties around my waist. It doesn't have a bib or anything. It's just a waist apron. So it covers the latter part of my dress so that I do. So, basically it's just a nice rag that I have to wipe my hands on, to pick up anything that is hot, but also to protect the front skirt of my dress, because that's a lot of fabric there. And if I ruin that fabric that's right in the front of my dress, well, then I can't wear this dress out anywhere without people staring at me. But I can ruin my apron. It's much easier to replace an apron than it is to replace an entire dress. I can take my apron off if I were to go to town, or if someone was to come over, and then I would look more presentable almost instantaneously. Around my middle, I have what you call a Sontag, or a bosom buddy. You might recognize it if you watched our program, our free public program that we had to the public in December about Victorian winter's fashions, and I go into a little bit more about the history of the Sontag there. So if you would like to check that out, be sure. If you've already seen it, I won't bore you, but if you have not looked at our mid-Victorian winter fashion free live stream, please go do so. It's on Facebook and it's on YouTube. And then on my head, I have a slat bonnet, which I have made. So a slat bonnet, it's a bonnet that has slats on it. It's rather self-explanatory. Right here, I actually have cardboard slats in mine. They could be made out of wood or even cardboard at this time, depending on when. Slat bonnets were used from the mid-1800s all the way up to the 1930s, where people are still sharecropping. Slat bonnets, they're a sun bonnet. Right now I have my slat bonnet. I like having my slat short. That way I can have it sit back on my head like this, where it's just kind of protecting my head, and then I can pull it farther over and farther to protect my face if I need to. But otherwise, if I pull it too far forward, I feel like I have blinders on and I can't see. But it's adjustable, so I can loosen or tighten it here, so I can tighten it so it sits really far back on my head, or I can loosen it so where it's almost a full visor, depending on what I'm doing, where the sun is. It's very useful and very utilitarian. Under my dress, I have, of course, my chemise, my corset, my pantalettes, and then I am wearing 2 petticoats today because it is chilly out. I have a corded petticoat that you can see here. So corded petticoat, it's literally a petticoat with cords that go around it. This is what I would wear closest to, well, I don't have to wear it closest to me. I could wear under petticoat under it. I just like in the layering of things, I think it works best to have it on the bottom. Because the way that a corded petticoat works is it's supposed to keep all the other petticoats from really getting twisted up in your legs. If you're wearing a lot of petticoats, it's supposed to help hold your skirts out, so it doesn't get all corded up between your legs to where it's hard to move. Now, corded petticoats, they can have lots and lots and lots of cords, and they can be starched, and For 1830s, 1840s, even up into the 1850s, that's all that ladies wore with a bunch of petticoats. Or they might even wear like a couple corded petticoats. Because they were trying to get that width out. And then once you hit the 1860s and like the hoop takes the place of the corded petticoat, except in working women's fashion, because you can't wear a hoop and work, but you still need to have warmth. You need to have petticoats for warmth. So that's why I have the petticoat there. It, holds out my skirt a little bit, but not too much. And then I have a nice flannel petticoat here to help keep me warm and make my skirt look full, but really to keep me warm, because at this point, I don't care if my skirt looks full. I am out here at my home cooking. It does not matter who sees me doing what. If my skirt looks full or not, I would like to stay warm while I am outside. And then of course, the skirt of my dress goes over that. Let's check on our honey cake. It's nice and brown along the front here. So I'm going to have to rotate it because apparently that part of the fire is hotter than the back part. All right, so this is as done as it's going to get with our fire. I just don't think my fire ever got hot enough to cook it all the way through. So as you can see, we definitely have a good browning and almost burnt around the edges, but the middle is still a bit, well, squishy. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, it came right on out. Because the sides are very done, as you can see. Oh, that didn't even stick to the pan or anything. That's cast iron. Gotta love it. It's nice and greased. But yeah, let's see. Is this all very burnt? All right, so the bottom is all very burnt and the top is not really done. Great. Gotta love open fire cooking. Have a little taste. See how it goes. Oh, that's really good. Since this only like semi-baked, it kind of tastes like cookie dough. The consistency. But it's really good. Would recommend honey cake. Just as long as you're doing it in an oven, which I think this recipe was originally calling for, you'll be fine. So 350, stick it in the oven in your cast iron pan. They said about 20 minutes. I sat out here with this thing for a good 45. Still didn't cook. Tried relighting my fire. Still didn't want to cook. Except the bottom, but just didn't want to cook through because I think it was so dense. So probably next time if I do this recipe out on a fire, probably going to use a Dutch oven because it's very dense. But it's really good. It's very nice and sweet without being too sugary. Would recommend this. But yeah, just make sure your fire is hot enough if you're doing it outside to where it can kind of like cook in all one go, or use a Dutch oven. But yeah.
So I went home and I made a honey cake the way the recipe said that it should be made in an oven, and it worked very well. So here we have the honey cake made the same way with the flour and the honey and the eggs and the butter, and I put it in a cake pan for 20 minutes in an oven and pulled it out, and it worked perfectly fine. So this is a lesson learned in transcribing modern recipes or recipes that are written for a modern oven into perhaps more historical recipes. Don't always translate the way you think that they should. So if I were to make this over a fire the next time, instead of using a pan like the recipe kind of called for, I said pan, so I was like, oh, well, I'll just stick it in a cast iron skillet. I would probably end up doing this in a Dutch oven and it would work out much better. At least that's my theory. We'll find out next time on Historical Baking with Marie.
All right, so this is Paula. All right, Paula, let's go for your first taste of honey cake.
Ready?
What do you think?
Before I can get my hair out of the way.
Spot on? Yeah?
Delicious.
Oh,
Perfect.
all right.
Thank you so much.
That's really good.
All right, Kathy, let's see what you think.
This is really good.
It's sweet, it's not too sweet, it's nice and soft and chewy. I love it. Good job, Marie.
It's sweet without being too sweet. I can see this pairing very well with some nice tea, maybe a coffee if you're a coffee drinker. It's a nice combination of bread and cake. So I see why like both names are sometimes used. So, because sometimes it's referred to as like honey cake and sometimes it's like honey bread. It's really a mixture of like a cake bread texture. And it looks like it's going to be almost like a bit dry, like cornbread, but it's not. It's really moist because of that honey. Thank you everyone for watching today. I hope you enjoyed learning about honey cake. It's very good. It's very good. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you being digital members of the History Center. It is always a joy. I hope you have a fantastic holiday season. And if you are close by, we hope to see you at the History Center soon.